Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone who is following live today and those who will be following the recording. Welcome to the session 4 of the European Info Day of the LIFE Clean Energy Transition Call 2023. This session is titled Towards an Effective Implementation of Key Legislation in the Field of Sustainable Policy and Maximize Use of and Valorizing the EPREL data through innovative application. EPREL stands for European Product Registry for Energy Labeling. So today we will have the pleasure of introducing to you two topics under this call, and we have the honor of having colleagues coming from DG Energy providing you with the background of the policy files, so you will get a full update before diving into your proposals. The LIFE CET, Clean Energy Transition Sub-Program, traditionally has had a focus on supporting the public administrations, both at the national and the local levels, to implement key pieces of EU legislation, in particular the energy efficiency, the renewable energy, and the energy performance of buildings directive. But here, in 2021, we had one specific topic open, focusing on the energy efficiency directive and on the renewable energy directive, whereas in 2022 we had one topic specifically focusing on the energy performance of buildings directive. This year, considering the Fit for 55 policy package, which is being finalized currently, there is a need for full support for the three pieces of legislation. So we are going to have three scopes open this year. So without further ado, I'm going to share with you the agenda. Please, can you share the agenda? You can go back to slide 1, please. In any case, yes. So we are going to have, as I mentioned, the policy background by three colleagues joining today from DG Energy, Margot Pinot, Vera Kisler, and Thibault Roy, presenting the energy efficiency, the renewable energy, and the energy performance of buildings directive, respectively. After that, I will give the floor to my colleague Ulrike Nussler, presenting the topic in detail, and then we will have time for questions and answers. After this first part of this session, I will hand the floor and the moderation over to my colleague Stamatis Sivitos, who will be moderating the second part, which will be dedicated to EPREL. So without further ado, just some housekeeping rules. You have the opportunity today really to engage with speakers, with experts in the field. This can be done through Slido. Slido, if you're not familiar with this tool, please join us through the website is slido.com, and you can join through the hashtag, which I'm going to read, EU Life 23. Please select this section, session 4, and you can, first of all, check the questions which have been already posted by your peers, and then vote those which are more of interest for you. And if you have more questions, please post them, and we will go back in the dedicated sections to respond to your questions. For those who are listening to us through the recordings, please be aware that we are going also to post frequently asked questions, so the answers to those questions on the EU tenders and the EU funding and tenders portal. So you will find, together with the text of the call, also the frequently asked questions with answers. So without further ado, I have the pleasure of giving the floor to our colleagues. So Margot, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luca, and good afternoon to everybody. My name is Margot Pinot. I work in Energy Efficiency Unit of DGNR, and I will start by presenting the broad context of energy policy of relevance to this session. So starting with the main element that drive the revision of the legislation in energy and climate Fit for 55 package, where we have the revision of energy efficiency directive, but also Renewable Energy Directive, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive that my colleagues will present. I will present you more in detail Energy Efficiency Directive, of which the revision is getting to the end, because we expect that the revised directive will be adopted very soon, probably in summer, and probably it will enter into force in September. Sorry, if we could change the slide, or should I do it in somehow? Thank you. Still, the formal adoption process is not accomplished today, so we cannot share with you the final text of the directive. But I would say the final shape of it should not change anymore substantially, because normally the co-legislators reach the political agreement, so all the provisions as they are agreed now, were agreed in March, on 9th of March, they should stay probably as they are. Therefore, we can give you already some hints and some elements of this agreement. Of course, the revision of Energy Efficiency Directive, like other directives that are highlighted here, was driven by the overall higher objective for the decarbonization that was put in a Fit for 55 package for 2030. And that's why revision of the subsequent objectives on energy efficiency, renewables was also necessary, and also the measures that will drive towards these objectives. The next slide, please. The next slide is talking about the other element of the broad general context that is of importance, which is the REPowerEU communication, which is the Commission reaction to the energy crisis driven by high prices and shortage of gas supply from Russia, and as a consequence of the war in Ukraine. As you know, this communication had as an objective, as a general goal, to decrease the dependence and let's say phase out the dependence of Russian fossil fuel imports by 2027. And one of the main elements of this, reaching this goal, is to reduce substantially energy demand, which can only be sustained through energy efficiency structural measures. That's how we will achieve a lasting reduction of energy demand. And therefore, for these reasons, the Commission, in its communication on REPowerEU, decided to amend its original proposals included in 455 on energy efficiency and renewables by increasing both headline targets and also including number of new measures and to accelerate deployment of renewables and energy efficiency technologies, like, for example, heat pumps. So that's all for the general context. And now, as regards Energy Efficiency Directive, so the third slide, please. The final agreement contains these main elements. Higher target for 2030 at EU level for primary and final energy consumption reduction. This target is set at 11.7% comparing to 2020 scenario. It is indicative for primary and binding for final energy consumption. This will require much of efforts, and therefore I think it's very relevant that we have support to member states for developing, evaluating impactful policies and measures that will help them reaching this very ambitious target. So therefore, within this call, you have also highlighted higher energy efficiency target as one of the call objectives that the support the projects could bring to national authorities or other relevant authorities that will be implementing measures for reaching this higher target. The second element worth highlighting is energy efficiency first principle that is for the first time put into the legal frame. So we have a new article, Article 3, that is focusing on energy efficiency first principle that should be integrated in all policy and investment decisions, and how to make it practical, and how to translate it into assessment methodologies, tools, and relevant methods. This is really something that is a challenge. Support in this direction will be very important, so that it is really effectively implemented on the ground in all the decision-making processes, whether they are investments or policy decisions or planning. The other element that is strengthened in the directive is the energy savings obligation. So this is the obligation that was currently under Article 7, and that will be in the future Article 8, 9, and 10. This obligation can be implemented in member states as energy efficiency obligation schemes or alternative measures, and is a key provision that ensures dedicated actions designed by member states to achieve energy savings in end use. So it's not about random, let's say, consumption reduction, but concrete measures that will achieve better efficiency in final uses, whether it's buildings or transport or any other final use of energy. So it's a very important provision, of which effective implementation really is of high importance to reaching the overall target on energy efficiency. And not only the ambition is higher, but also we have more complicated, let's say, calculation of savings, because the target that you see here will be phased out progressively. So it's 1.49% per year, but it's average target for the whole obligation period, and it will be phased in a stepwise approach. So here, member states will certainly require some technical assistance, some support in design and calculation of contributions and evaluation of measures, because it will not be easy for them. And also there is another element, which is fossil fuels savings exclusion, which is kicking in 2024, in 2026. It's a little bit complex. So here also support will be needed, and we count on projects to support national authorities in designing the relevant measures that will be in compliance with the new energy savings obligation. The next important element that I want to highlight is a stronger exemplary role of public sector, where we have a new chapter dedicated to public sector role in energy efficiency, with a totally new target on public sector energy consumption reduction, which is of 1.9% per year. This target will be indicative at the beginning, but after 4 years, after entry into forces, it will become mandatory for member states, for the whole public sector, so all public bodies included. And there will be a challenge for national, regional, local authorities to gather the consumption data and to implement measures in order to reach this target. And therefore, certainly support is needed. Worth highlighting is also the annual renovation rate of public buildings, that is of 3%. This is not a new measure. However, the scope of this measure is extended because it covers not only central government buildings, but all public buildings, including local level, regional level, all public bodies buildings. Again, this is something, this extension of the scope is something that might be challenging for public bodies. One more element that you have here in the slide is heating and cooling planning at regional and local level, as well as efficient district heating and cooling. This definition is strengthening decarbonization pathway of the sector, district heating sector, where this definition is progressively including more and more higher and higher share of renewables and decreasing the share of fossil fuels. So in order to comply with this definition, district heating operators will need to do substantial investments. And this is kind of in line with both energy efficiency and renewables directive, looking at the decarbonization of the sector of district heating towards 2050. So that's all I have here on the slide, but I wanted to add one more information about energy saving services, because I know that the call is also targeting those. Energy services provisions are also strengthened in the directive, and especially the role of public sector by as a driver to develop the market for energy services, for energy performance contracting, where the use of energy performance contracting is becoming almost mandatory, or at least assessment of using energy performance contracting for large buildings renovation is a mandatory step that public sector will have to do. Therefore, support in this area will be of importance to address the well-known barriers that are in the way for energy service market development. So this is everything I have on my side, and I will pass the floor to my colleagues who will present you then renewables and energy performance of buildings directive. Thank you.
Thank you, Margot. I will take over here for the Renewable Energy Directive. My name is Vera Kissler. I work in the Renewables unit of DG Ener. Next slide, please. So this is just to illustrate we are in a similar situation as the Energy Efficiency Directive. There is a political agreement on the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive on both proposals, the Fit for 55 proposal and the Repower EU proposal. And the formal adoption is still outstanding over the coming months. But what we can already say that there is an increased level of ambition. We are moving from the current 32% target of renewable share in 2030 to a binding target of 42.5%, with an additional aspirational target of 2.5%. So together that means almost a doubling of the current share of renewables. Next slide, please. To achieve these ambitious targets, the directive has several elements and measures, and I want to highlight here the two which are covered in the call text. On self-consumption and renewable energy communities, the directive provision have not changed. They are still the ones that were originally adopted in 2018. And on administrative procedures, we have some new measures that I will explain in 1 second. Next slide, please. So we have seen that slow and complex permit granting procedures are an increasingly visible and pressing barrier for the faster deployment of renewable energy projects. The issues range from lengthy procedures with a lot of paperwork to limited citizen and community involvement. Often there are many parallel procedures and limited coordination. Also, the human resources and skills of permit granting authorities can be a barrier, or the limited or even sometimes non-existing spatial planning for renewable projects. Also, there are long waiting times for grid connection permits. Next slide, please. So to tackle these different barriers, we have issued recommendations, and some of them will become binding under the revised directive. First of all, we encourage member states to set up clear, short, and digitalized procedures for the granting of permits for renewable energy projects to facilitate citizen and community participation. So here we have the link also again to the renewable energy communities, but there can be also other forms of passing benefits of renewable projects to local communities. We recommend member states to improve the internal coordination, to have clear responsibilities at the different administrative levels, and of course to set up single contact points, which are already required under the current Renewable Energy Directive. Also, the funding for upskilling and reskilling of permit granting bodies is really important to ensure that the staff needs are covered to reach the NECP targets. And on the spatial planning side, member states will be required under the revised directive to identify the areas which are needed to reach the 2030 targets and to designate also particularly suitable areas where the permit granting procedures can be even lighter and faster. And the environmental assessments are streamlined. Finally, for the grid connection, we recommend to go to a long-term planning and investment approach and to facilitate the grid repowering projects and optimizing grid capacity. And this is what I wanted to present on the Renewable Energy Directive side. I will now hand over to Thibault for the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive.
Thank you, Vera, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Thibault Roy. I work in the unit dealing with the energy performance of buildings and products. And I will now run you through our proposal for the revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. So the EPBD, which is scope C of the topic. And which is a key file to deliver on our Fit 55 objectives next to the EED and the RED, as buildings amount to 40% of energy use in the EU. The goal with the EPBD in particular is to more than double the rate of renovations and also to foster deeper renovations. In terms of process for the proposal, the Commission adopted its proposal in December 2021. The Council, so Member States and the European Parliament, in the meantime, have also adopted their own positions. And we are now entering into negotiations between the three institutions. We aim to reach an agreement by the end of the year, building on the common ground between the three institutions. Now, as to the substance of the proposal, the EPBD recast aims to deliver on 4 sets of objectives, which you can see on the slide. The first is renovation, increasing the renovation rate, but also as a second objective, decarbonization towards our 2050 climate neutrality objective. The third is about modernization and digitalization. And the fourth is about financing as part of a more transversal enabling framework. I will now present some of the key provisions which are part of the proposal, mainly those in the 2 columns on the left of the slide, because most of the others are also covered in other topics. So starting with renovation, the proposal includes wording on minimum energy performance standards, or MEPS, which will require member states to focus their efforts on the renovation of the worst performing buildings, meaning to start with those with an energy performance class G and F, or equivalent. The proposal also includes provisions on the rescaling of energy performance certificates, EPCs, to set common criteria among member states and common trigger points for those EPCs to be issued and communicated. Now, moving to the column on decarbonization, for new builds, the zero emission building, or ZEB standard, would progressively replace the current NZEB, the nearly zero energy building, and those ZEB buildings would have zero on-site carbon equivalent emissions. We're also progressively bringing life cycle carbon emissions or global warming potential into the picture with reporting obligations for new build as part of the EPBD proposal. The recast also includes updates to the cost optimality methodology and the associated minimum energy performance requirements, also to factor in CO2 equivalent emissions and co-benefits of renovations and reduce energy use. Finally, the proposal would also require member states to set up national databases to collect building related data, including data in particular from the energy performance certificates, and to transfer them to an EU-wide database. Now, I stop here for the presentation. In case you need to refer to specific wording, I would invite you to have a direct look at the Commission proposal, which is accessible online. And we look forward to receive your proposals to ensure quality implementation of our legislation and benefit from the experience of frontrunners. Many thanks.
Thank you very much for this very inspiring presentations. So we listen from colleagues working in DG Energy, the main new elements of the energy efficiency, the renewable energy and the energy performance of buildings directive. You are listening to the session, parallel session number 4, dedicated to policy and to the EPREL topics. Just as a reminder for those who have joined us a little bit later, you have an opportunity to ask questions and to engage directly with our speakers today. And this can be done through Slido, slido.com. For those who are not familiar, the hashtag is EULIFE2023. So please do not hesitate to ask questions. We are going to handle the questions for policy after the presentation of my colleague, Ulrike Nuschler, who is going to go into the details of the call for proposal dedicated with the objectives, the expected impacts, and other requirements. Ulrike, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I would wait for my presentation, but I take the opportunity to just thank again the ANA colleagues that have made themselves available for supporting us here. And I think that's the wrong one. We need the 4.2. Because I'm not Stamatis, I'm Ulrike. Yeah, better. Thank you so much. So the presentation will be very dense and we have little time, so excuse me if I rush a bit through it. If we can have the first slide, please. I mean, the next one. Voila. So just to start with a couple of basics, this is an other grants action type, meaning a funding rate of 95%. You need a minimum of 3 applicants from 3 countries. We have an indicative budget for the topic of overall 8 million euros. And we think, but this is not prescriptive, an indicative budget per project for up to 2 million. 2 things just ahead before I go into the details. Under this topic, we would expect applicants to be very, very aware of the policy context and also the discussions that are at stake. Otherwise, it will be hard to have a credible activity. And you would also expect to receive future-proof proposals. So proposals that can accommodate also changes and things related to the fact that, for example, the EPBD is even not so close to adoption as the ED and the RED are. So there needs to be some flexibility to be able to respond also to upcoming support needs. Next slide, please. Just one very little word and not a whole slide on the objectives before we go into the scope of the topic. It's very obvious that the support for member states in the implementation of sustainable energy policy is always needed, has always been needed, but today, facing the huge energy-related challenges that have found their response in an even more ambitious energy and climate legislation, the need is even more pressing and bigger. So this is why this topic is even more relevant than ever, and it also means that that we have opened 3 scopes this time: for the EED, for the Renewables Energy Directive, and the EPBD, exactly because of that. And at this topic, we want to support the implementation of sustainable energy policies, and it's very clear and has to be also clear with the borders with other topics. The main target groups are member states and their implementing bodies. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't be able in your activity to also involve regional or local authorities, but the main target group is really member states and their bodies. So as you see on the slide, there are 4 main themes, I would like to call them. we start with the support for sharing best practices and within and across member states, and that would be in addition to what is being done anyway in the concerted actions that exist that you are probably aware of for the PBD and the Renewable Energy Directive. But we also want to, and this has been one of the focal points of our activities in the past, support projects that provide technical advice and analytical work for the contextualization and specification of requirements. So that means translating the EU provisions into national law and making them fit the national context. This can also include, of course, the assessment of implementation options and their impacts. As a third block, we would like to support projects that help monitoring and evaluation of policies, because this is still a huge gap. So we have seen this also in other projects. There's a huge gap. And this we also want to support actions that help calculate and account for contributions that are being made under specific policy measures and programs. So not just overall, but for specific programs. And finally, we also want to support actions that collect data and help evaluate and reporting across the different pieces of legislation, because very often this is just done per piece of legislation, but not across. But the more time goes, the more we see how interlinked these policies are, and that it requires a cross collection of data and across reporting. So that is for the general scope. If I can please have the next slide. Voila. So as I said, we have opened 3 scopes this year in 23, but I would like to start, of course, with the scope A, which is the ED. So clearly actions under this scope are expected to address provisional aspects of the ED, and this is somehow normal, in particular those provisional aspects that are subject to changes in the context of the current revision. So to highlight just some of these, but the scope is not limited to these. This could be, for example, actions that, as regards the energy efficiency first principle, as Margot mentioned, new Article 3, that could be supporting operational implementation and developing assessment methodologies, tools and benchmarks. It could be, as regards the energy efficiency targets, actions that support new methods to collect and integrate sources of data to forecast trends and to evaluate policies and measures. It could be also, for example, as regards the role of the public sector, and Margot really underlined the new relevance or the new emphasis that is being put on the public sector, support for gathering and calculating data from and for public bodies. As regards the energy savings and obligations and the energy efficiency obligation schemes, it could be supporting the design and implementation and the calculation evaluation of measures exactly under those articles and schemes. But also energy services, Margot mentioned that it could be support for establishing standard contracts and quality control schemes. As I said, you can also come up with activities that are outside these aspects. This is just those points that we would like to highlight under scope A, ED. Next slide, please. So scope B, support for the implementation of the Renewable Energy Directive. You see that there on the slide that there are 3 main areas of activities. The first one around permitting, the second one around self-consumption, and the third around renewable energy communities. So just going fast, as regards permitting, we have identified 2 priorities. The first one would be supporting the joint development of tools, best practices, and training programs through an EU community of practitioners. And EU community of practitioners, that would mean, or that would consist of the contact points as defined in the Renewable Energy Directive, but also other permit granting authorities, including at regional and local level. But also other permit granting processes and administrative procedures provisions that so far don't work really well and mean a market barrier. So actions that would help with this to streamline it and to accelerate those processes, including for the identification of land and sea areas, good for renewable plans and plans for RES go-to areas. So as regards self-consumption, energy sharing, this is the column in the middle. We would like actions to address in particular the need for enabling frameworks that facilitate self-consumption, energy sharing. And there, for example, this could be a good example in multi-apartment blocks. And the last point, as regards renewable energy communities, we look for actions that address renewable energy communities and potential interactions with citizens' energy communities. And this in particular in the sectors that have not been so much involved or not been so common for these kind of communities, for example, the heating sector and the flexibility services. And moreover, we are interested in different governance models and principles. However, these need, of course, be compliant with the definition of renewable energy communities as in the directive. Next slide, please. Coming to scope C, support for the implementation of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, EPBD. You see on that slide that here we have made two focal areas. One is related more to the instruments supporting the energy performance of buildings, meaning classically EPCs, BRPs. The other one related to the transition to a climate neutral building stock. So under the first focal area, we want to support actions to enhance the effectiveness and coherence of instruments for better energy performance of buildings. That could mean, for example, as regards minimum energy performance standards, could be actions, for example, to support the development of these standards, monitoring tools, and creating an enabling framework. That could be technical, but that could be in particular financial measures that accompany the introduction of maps. As regards information tools and notably energy performance certificates, this could be, for example, support for the rescaling, calculation of EPCs, and the identification of worst performing buildings, but also the coordination of the different instruments, notably EPCs with other tools like BRP and the SRI, so building renovation passports and smart readiness indicator, sorry. And as regards buildings data, and in line with Article 19, as it has been proposed for the revision, this could mean methodologies to collect, aggregate, integrate, and report data. It could be data governance, and it could be support for member states to establish their national databases. But note that under the topic Better, there's also part that addresses data. So be careful that the activity that you want to propose matches the right scope and the right topic. So under the second focal area, we want to support actions to support the transition to a climate neutral building stock, notably as regards zero emission buildings. This could mean support for defining benchmarks and for refining the concept inside or against the national context. As regards to global warming potential, this could be support for the setting up and the implementation of life cycle, global warming, potential calculations, finally, in view of establishing a European framework. And as regards minimum energy performance requirements, so not the maps of beforehand, these actions could look into calculation methodologies, for example, the cost optimal. So next slide, please. I think I won't explain this slide because normally you would have heard this already in the plenary and in the foregoing session. So I would just, in the interest of time, skip it. So coming then to the topic-specific impacts for this topic, for the policy proposal, policy topic, sorry. What are the impacts for these topics? And I would like to concentrate here. So it's an increased understanding and knowledge in public administrations. We would like your projects to contribute to a more effective and consistent implementation of the provisions, including a better planning and evaluation of measures. We would like to contribute, or your projects contribute to improved data quality and monitoring, and to an improved understanding of potentials and barriers. So how could you measure this? I don't need to read this all out to you, but of course, classical impact indicators would be number of public authorities with increased capacities, number of public authorities and stakeholders using the tools and resources and data that you provide, number of policy measures that are being improved, and number of references in policy relevant documents. I could only encourage you, and that would be the activity-specific indicators, to come up yourself by good indicators that reflect the real impact of your project. This is even more relevant under this topic than in any other. So to finish off, my last slide, next one, is just project examples, because it might not be so obvious how this project could look like. In the past, we have had, and they're just finishing or have finished, for example, StreamSafe and ANSMOF, classical projects that would help member states to calculate and evaluate their activities and their policy measures under the old Article 3 and the old Article 7 of the Energy Efficiency Directive. We have a new project in the field of renewables, which is ready for heat. And for example, the very classical one that is also being funded under this topic is Odyssey that collects consumption data and detects also trends in energy consumption. I think that was my last slide. Yes, more or less. Keep in touch with us. Yes, please. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ulrike. We are running a little bit late, so I can invite our contractors to share the questions received so far. And in the meantime, of course, before we go to the EPREL topic, in case we receive more questions, we will then deal with them in a written form afterwards. And those questions will be also published on the portal on the funding and tender portal of the European Commission. So for those listening the recording, please do not hesitate to ask questions and to check those frequently asked questions. So I'm going to read, if you can go back to one slide, please, the previous slide. Yes, thank you so much. So we have a number of questions. I can start with the third one. I see overlaps with other topics, for example, as regard to EPCs or data. Is there a general line? And here I can reply very quickly. In a text topic, you will see for each of the scopes some references to specific other topics. For example, there was one slide with the main provisions of the Energy Efficiency Directive dedicated to district heating. If you go to the topic text, you will see some specific references to that topic. So for proposals addressing district heating and cooling, please refer to specific topic. And we were going, for example, to discuss and present this later. So please refer to the cross references on the topic text directly. We will also have one question: how to deal with the uncertainty linked to the fact that the new legislation is not yet adopted. My colleague Ulrike has already answered that the proposals should be future proof and have some flexibility, but I let her complement this.
Well, I raised actually my hand because I want to compliment on the previous one, because indeed for EPCs is very classical. Please look at it, and there might not even be a cross-reference, but under the better Reno topic is more the market uptake and the concrete link with data, while for EPCs is really member states. And I think that you should have in mind, and that I said already, target group are member states. So of course you can involve other levels, but main target group is member states, and I think that should be a guiding principle. So for the no, I don't need to. I think you said everything on the second one that is highlighted.
There's one last
yeah.
Whether proposals should address one or more than one, or even all the aspects listed under one scope.
Yeah, well, you are asked to focus on one scope, but if you think, because we also want to support activities that are across legislation. So if you have in mind a very good activity that would address more scopes, just justify it. If you have a good reason, then it won't be a problem. So that's fine. And but you find also text on this inside the call text, how to deal with it.
The question is also asking within each scope whether all the aspects must be addressed. Not necessarily. For example, in the case of Scope B, Renewable Energy Directive, you are specifically mentioned, please address one or more. You are not required to address all of the bullet points, to be clear. I think we can stop there unless Ulrike wants to add something else. So we are done. Please, if you have more questions, don't hesitate to post them on the tender and funding portal of the Commission. We will answer and make all those answers available for everyone. And without further ado, I hand the moderation over to my colleague Stamatis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luca. Good afternoon from my side as well. For those that have joined just now, you are in parallel session 4. The part on the topic towards an effective implementation of key legislation in the field of sustainable energy has been completed, and we are now moving on to the EPREL topic, maximizing use of and valorizing EPREL data through innovative applications. We will start with a policy background by my colleague Paolo from DG Ener, and then I'll be taking you through the topic, followed by Q&A, for which you can already start launching any questions you have by using Slido and the code EULIFE23. So without any further ado, Paolo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stamatis. You should stop sharing to allow me. Thank you. Okay. 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 I hope you are seeing my slide. Can you confirm? Because I cannot control from here.
We can, Paolo.
Okay, fine. So I will provide a presentation in 2 parts, a few slides to frame the policy and the tool that I will present, and a second part where I will provide a quick demonstration of what you can do with this tool called EPREL. So let's start with basically of the entire framework of energy efficiency. We will focus on energy efficiency of products that is composed of 2 frameworks, basically, eco-design and energy labeling. Eco-design targets manufacturers by setting minimum requirements that any product has to satisfy in order to be allowed to be placed on the European market. The focus of eco-design has been in the past the energy efficiency of a product during use, but more and more we are focusing on the entire life cycle, and for example on extending the usability of embodied energy and carbon by extending the lifetime of products with repair and durability requirements, but also for end-of-life requirements by enhancing the possibility of recycling materials. On the other side, we have energy labeling that, on the contrary, targets customers, including public procurers, so member states. And this policy frameworks aims at driving the purchase choice of consumers towards the most efficient products that are allowed by eco-design to be placed on the European market. And these 2 policies have a combined effect that we call a push and pull. To explain what it is, let's use this animation where I show the example of a very simple product such as light bulbs. So this situation represents an hypothetical scenario where there is no policy in place, and of course the worst product on the market sets the baseline for its efficiency, and there is an average efficiency that is the weighted average given by the efficiency of all the products on the market and their share of market. Now let's introduce an eco-design legislation. Of course, this sets a new bar, raises the bar of minimal performance. And as a result of this, all the models that are below this bar are banned and pushed out of the market. as a result of this, we have a first increase of the average efficiency of the products that are still existing on the market. For many products, we stop here, so we only set eco-design requirements, but for a number of them, we also set energy labeling requirements, and the effect of this is at least doable. First of all, the consumers are oriented generally towards the products that provide the least cost in terms of life cycle. But this is not crystal clear because the label provides only information about the efficiency of a product, and the life cycle cost depends on the usage done by the consumer. So this is food for thought for you as well. A second effect of this legislation is also to encourage competition between manufacturers that, of course, wish to have their models appear in the top classes of the legislation. And the success of this is clearly visible historically, because you know that the original A to G grading has been extended to A+, A++, A triple plus, until the review of the energy labeling legislation decided to go back to A to G. Now, this rescaling has introduced a new challenges that will be the topic of my presentation, and to solve which we will show how EPREL can be used. But in a nutshell, you see how the push and pull combined effect is raising the average efficiency of the products at least twice, thanks to this mechanism. Here I copied an example of procurement criteria. This one is about monitors, and this is rather old in the formulation. I circled in red the static criteria, where the efficiency of the monitors to be selected is set in A to D class. This is now problematic, and in the next part of the presentation I will show how this could be really problematic. And the reason for this, the problems behind this, is that in the review of the labeling legislation, in order to avoid classes to be rescaled too frequently, some rules were set. Basically, that we go back to A to G scale, and that no rescaling should be done before 10 years or so. And to make this possible, when a legislation sets the starting point, starts applying, at least the top class A should be totally empty of any model, and for products that are quickly evolving, typically electronic products, even the B class should be empty. This is sometimes introducing some difficulty, particularly for the consumer, to understand which is the highest class that could be looked for, and for procurers in particular that have to set the minimal requirement in tenders. The energy labeling legislation has set a requirement to be used for this. So instead of referring to a specific class, the requirement should be generally that the highest significantly populated class or the highest two significantly populated classes should be included in tendering procedures. This has to be analyzed and carefully evaluated with the help of EPREL, as I will show shortly. Here on the left, I copied the article of a legislation that mentions these highest two significantly populated classes, and on the right there is a screenshot of requirements on energy-related products from the green taxonomy, where this wording is copy-pasted, but not entirely, because the significantly keyword was dropped, and this may cause problem. I will provide now the demo to show how to use EPREL to solve this issue, but right before that, so what is EPREL? The basis, legal basis was set in the energy labeling regulation, so the review of a directive of 2017. In Article 12, putting an obligation on the Commission to create this database. Since January 2018, manufacturers and importers can register their models before they place them on the market, and nowadays we have over 1.5 million registered products in the database, some of which are already not placed on the market anymore, but are in the database anyhow. And since of 1st of April of last year, we have given public visibility and the search capabilities for to the public. The access is via computer, the classic computer with a specific interface, but also smartphones and small devices can be used. And in particular, every product in shops, for example, will be available with a QR code in the top right part, and by scanning with a smartphone this QR code, you will be led to the EPREL. Before the demo, and not to forget, I suggest to participate to a discussion, a policy discussion that we will have during the EU Sustainable Energy Week on 21st of June, where the topic of use of digital tools will be the object of a discussion. And now I switch to the demonstration very quickly. So this is the home page of EPREL. Here you have the list of all product groups that are in the scope of a legislation. And we'll give just a couple of quick examples to show how it works, basically. So let's start from displays. The page that appears as a top left section with search criteria that are the same, identical for every product group. But below there is a specific section that is different based on the specific product group. So the search selection criteria is specific. On the right, you have a list of products. The order first appearing is pseudo-random, meaning that the latest placed on the market appear first. And what you can do is already you can see that there are some fields that can be used to sort the results. You can go into a specific model to look for details, and what you get is this page, that is the same page that you get when in a shop you scan the QR code on the label. So this is the page you will get. Graphically, it will be slightly different if you use a smartphone, but basically it's the same. Here you have information about the supplier. You can report a possibly non-compliant model, and you can print the product information sheet in every language. But let's go back and let's make the example of a public administration, for example, a university or a school that wishes to procure a high number of monitors for a classroom, for a computer room. And what you can do is going into the advanced section. So you select monitors. You can select the screen diagonal. For example, we wish 24 inches monitors. So let's put 24 to 25, and let's imagine that you want to restrict the choice to at least HD resolution. So you put it's sufficient to put the horizontal resolution, and then you launch the search. So out of a 17, almost 18,000 displays in the database, those that satisfy the selection criteria are 235. What you can do at this point is, for example, sorting them using 3 simultaneous criteria. But the more relevant is that you can have an instant view of what is the general situation. Here I come back to the issue I was mentioning when criteria focus on the A and B class, or A, B, C, D, etc. In this case, for example, going down to the D class means that for this size and this resolution, the monitors that you have on the market represent the best 15% of the market. So in this case, the criteria could be okay, but for a different resolution or a different size, already the D class could be not adequate, and the share of market could be very, very little, with the risk of not finding models on the market of a specific country. So this tool, EPREL, has always to be used to carefully verify the minimal requirement that are set in a tender. A quick second example using another product. Here the example is a bit more sophisticated, and let's assume that you are a municipality that is tendering the tires for a fleet of urban buses. So in this case, what you would select is only truck and bus tires, and you would have to enter the size of your tires. So I put here, for example, a typical size of bus tires, 2.5, and I could add additional criteria. For example, if I'm in a Nordic country, I could be interested in tires that are also usable in winter time. So out of 163,000 tires in the database, those that satisfy this criteria are only 239. Now, which class should I require as a minimum? Okay, I can have a first view from here. So now EPREL is analyzing the overall situation, and you see here it's a bit more complex because I have 3 criteria, and the taxonomy is mandating fuel efficiency and external rolling noise, but for the municipality also safety, so wet grip class could be very relevant. So the criteria have to be checked because, for example, the A class here is totally empty, and by setting a requirement too strict could lead to really a very few tires that could be offered. So imagine, for example, that for fuel efficiency, I require A and B class, so at least the B, sorry. And for wet grip, I request just A, and as the taxonomy requires for noise, I require just A. At this point, from first 39, let's see how many I will get. Well, only one tire. So, of course, this requirement is too strict. So what I could do, well, as noise is really irrelevant in a bus, especially in a diesel bus making a lot of noise, first thing I would do is to enlarge the noise class, and if this is not sufficient enough, okay, I will extend again, and here, okay, I have at least 16 tires. So this was just an example of how EPREL can be used to help public procurers set the minimal requirements in public tenders. And that's all from my side.
Thank you very much, Paolo, for this very comprehensive overview of the product energy efficiency legislative framework, as well as the very detailed demos of EPREL. So I will now take you through the EPREL topic, and just to remind you, in case you have any questions, on Slido the code is EU LIFE 23. So if we can please have the presentation on the EPREL topic, which is about maximizing use of and valorizing EPREL data through innovative applications. I do not yet see the presentation, but I think it's coming very soon. If it is taking a couple more seconds, I will start with the objective of the topic in the meantime, so we can go to the next slide. And I would just like to, in the next slide, please, just like to keep the figure of 1.5 million registered models in EPREL, as Paolo mentioned, and then moving into the next slide on the objective of the topic. This significant and increasing amount of data represents a dual challenge. On the one hand, it necessitates a systematic quality check, while on the other hand, it's a significant resource that should be further valorized. Imagine of a gold mine, and how do we extract this very valuable data? So the objective is to maximize use of valorizing EPREL data. A proposal submitted under this topic, which is a new topic, should demonstrate how they will contribute to an increased use of EPREL and valorization of its data, which is expected to increase uptake of more energy efficient products. So in the next slide on the scope, proposals should cover one or more of the following areas. Firstly, systematically checking and improving EPREL data. For example, plausibility check of data not used to determine the energy classes, such as noise and water use, as well as reporting issues identified, for example, errors in labels or product parameter values that are wrong. And this can be done via using the EPREL's missing or erroneous model reporting features. Another area that proposals can tackle is promoting further EPREL's use, as well as innovative utilization for new applications, such as Paolo has identified and demonstrated already, assessing the highest significantly populated efficiency class for green public procurement, or for undertaking data analysis to support policy making. These activities should complement EPREL with additional data, such as the global trade item number identifier, including key information for consumers, such as retail prices, availability, or points of sale, in order to allow easier retrieval of models. And this should be done via developing new user-friendly tools and services, or combining such data with existing software, such as price comparison applications, using a application programming interface that I'll refer to a bit later on. And thirdly, proposals can undertake crowdsourced compliance control of the publicly available data, with input from consumers and economic operators to boost compliance, completeness, and reliability of the data. Continuing under scope in the next slide, proposed actions are encouraged to develop appropriate software to automate and facilitate this work. In this respect, synergies should be sought with related activities in the field, so potentially building on existing work, and I'll come back to a few examples in the next slide. Proposers should, no, we just go to the last slide, please, and I'll come to this in a second. The proposed actions should target the software sustainability beyond the action. So how will the software that's been developed be maintained? If we can go back 2 slides, please. Exactly. Proposals could elaborate policy recommendations. And finally, proposals should undertake communication activities and actively promote the EPREL to raise retailers' awareness on its existence and stimulate their potential role as multipliers. So attention in this respect should be given in particular to reaching small and medium-sized retailers. And in this respect, we have in mind those not engaged in trade associations or located in remote areas. Moving to the next slide on some examples. You see on the left here the energy rating calculator from the Australian government. In the middle, you have a web app developed by a Horizon 2020 project, the Label 2020 project, which helps consumers in the purchase decisions, comparing various product features and getting estimations on the expected running costs and indication of the total cost of certain domestic appliances. And this web tool actually extracts data from EPREL, and there's also a web crawler. So under the NordCrawl project you see on the right, which was developed to undertake market surveillance work, so identify missing labels online as an example of what could be done. Moving on to the next slide on impact indicators that you heard earlier as well from my colleague. The main point to keep in mind here is that there are 3 types of impacts that complement each other. And it's important, as is written in those last 2 bullet points, to undertake and make sure that the proposals identify the starting point and the underlying assumptions, as well as establish a clear link between the activity and the impacts. And of course, the impacts need to be quantified for the project duration and 5 years after the project ends. In the next slide, we can see the topic-specific indicators, which are, for this topic, number of models in or outside EPREL checked and improvements proposed, administrative savings by using EPREL in public procurement or policy making in euros, and number of users utilizing the new applications, the topic-specific indicators. As an indication, the budget for this for these proposals would be up to an indicative budget is up to 2.5 million euros. So moving on to the next slide, which brings me to the end of the presentation. In case there's any further questions, this is the mailbox to refer to and ways to keep in touch with Cinea and the Clean Energy team. And now we can move on to any questions and answers. Any questions you may have? If we can have the Slido questions, please. in the meantime, okay, great. So we have 3 questions here. Do proposals need to focus on specific product groups, reflecting these accordingly in the consortium's composition? The short answer is that the topic leaves the scope of proposals rather open as to what product groups, and ideally all those under in the EPREL could be eventually targeted, but otherwise it would have to be justified which should be in the scope of these proposals. The intention is to cover the largest scope possible. Maybe going on to the question that is on the second point, do proposals need to cover all 3 areas, including under the topic's scope? I think I've covered that. It's 1 or more of the following areas that proposals should cover. The next one I see, are there any expected developments on EPREL? Additional features or functions that proposals should already take into account? There is the missing module feature that is expected in 23. Paolo, would you have anything to add on that question?
Well, there is plenty of work in progress, part of which is not visible from the public site. For example, we are developing so-called plausibility checks that should, on one side, help manufacturers to check the plausibility of the data they enter and compatibility, and for example checking that the public value is not more favorable than the declared value.
Anything on the public website?
The public website, for example, we are going to review the design of the public interface, and we are devising new forms to be proposed, for example, taking inspiration from the similar Australian database that you just showed, and something that we would like to implement, but with the limited resources we are struggling, would be a tool that would help the consumer choice, considering not only the top efficiency, but the life cycle cost of a product. So, for example, checking, comparing 2 products where the cost is input, because we cannot put in EPREL the cost, but to put in the cost, put in the, for example, the cost of energy per kilowatt hour in the specific area where the purchaser is living, and comparing which is the break-even life cycle cost of 2 products or more. We have already implemented a report tool for issues that the visitor can see on existing products, and we are going to implement a tool, but we have still to start the analysis, a tool to report missing products. So products that are spotted on the market, but they do not exist in EPREL, so they are not registered.
Thank you, Paolo, and
these are basically the developments we have already scheduled.
Thank you very much. And I'll take the last question, as we are out of time. Is the indicative budget of €2.5 million for the topic or per project? This would be the EU contribution per project. And the one on human rights protection, if these will be added to EPREL, I am not fully clear what is exactly meant, but if you would like to follow up with any further questions, or if there are any further questions in the coming weeks, I invite you to send them to the mailbox that was in the earlier PowerPoint. So with that, I would like to remind everyone that the recordings will be available on the CINEA website very soon. I'd like to also highlight the possibility that you can meet bilaterally with other organizations through the B2Match platform from the 2nd of June, tomorrow. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your participation. Particular thanks to our speakers for their very insightful presentations. And of course, good luck to all of you that will be putting forward proposals. Thank you very much.